Doctors couldn't save the female CEO until a poor single dad did something shocking. 500 of the world's best doctors, millions of dollars spent, every treatment failed, every specialist baffled. A woman dying in the most exclusive hospital suite in Boston, her body destroying itself in ways medical science couldn't explain. And then at 3 a.m, a man knocked on her door holding a small glass jar, and what happened next would change everything they thought they knew about healing, about wisdom, and about who gets to be a hero. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The fluorescent hallway lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed their usual monotone symphony as Jonah Graves stood outside Suite 12, his heart hammering against his ribcage. His weathered hands, calloused from years of gripping mop handles and pushing industrial cleaning equipment, trembled slightly as they clutched the small glass jar. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Behind that door lay Eliana Mercer, CEO of Ashford Biotech, one of the most powerful women in Massachusetts, dying. And he, a 40-year-old night shift janitor, was about to walk in there with something that could either save her life or get him arrested. His janitor's uniform suddenly felt too tight. The jar felt impossibly heavy. What am I doing?
But then he remembered watching her through the partially open door just last week, sitting alone at 3 a.m., trying to work on her laptop despite the bandages wrapped around her hands. Remembered the sound of her crying, deep, sorrowful sobs that echoed the kind of grief he knew too well. Remembered her whispering to herself, "I built my company to help people. Now I can't even help myself." Jonah raised his hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Mariah stood there, Eliana's assistant, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her eyes narrowed the instant she saw him. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp as a scalpel. "This is a private room." Jonah's throat went dry. "I wanted to speak with Miss Mercer." "About what? The floors?" Mariah's tone dripped with contempt. She positioned herself squarely in the doorway, a human barrier. "It's almost 3 a.m. Get out immediately or I'm calling security." "Mariah, wait." The voice from inside was weak, barely above a whisper. "What is it you want?" Jonah tried to see past Mariah's shoulder. "Ma'am, I know how this looks." "Oh, I'm sure you do." Mariah's hand moved to her phone. "A janitor showing up in the middle of the night with who knows what in a jar. This is completely inappropriate. I'm calling security right now." "Please," Jonah said, his voice gaining strength. "I've watched Miss Mercer suffer for weeks. I've seen the doctors fail one after another. And I have something that might help."
Mariah actually laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound that made Jonah's face flush. "Are you serious right now? You have something that might help? You, a janitor, have solved what the best medical minds in the world couldn't?" She turned her head slightly toward the room. "Eliana, this is absurd. He's probably trying to sell some snake oil. Security will—" "It's not snake oil." Jonah's jaw clenched. "It's a remedy that saved my daughter's life when she had a condition that destroyed her skin, when the doctors gave up." "Oh, please. Every charlatan has a story. Every scammer preys on desperate people. Eliana, I'm calling security now. This man is clearly—" "Show me." Both Jonah and Mariah turned to look toward the bed. "Eliana, you can't be serious," Mariah protested, her voice rising. "This man is a nobody. He cleans floors. He probably got this concoction from some internet conspiracy site. You've had Nobel Prize winners examining you, and you're going to listen to—" "Show me what you brought." Eliana's voice was stronger now, cutting through Mariah's objection. He held up the small jar. Through the glass, a golden substance caught the light. "It's a specific mixture of calendula, colloidal oatmeal, raw honey, and lavender oil, but the key is in how it's prepared and where the ingredients come from." Mariah scoffed loudly. "Honey and oatmeal? This is ridiculous. Eliana, your immunologist from Harvard prescribed cutting-edge biologics designed in a laboratory, and this janitor thinks honey is the answer. The biologics nearly killed me, Mariah. The quiet statement hung in the air. That's different, Mariah shot back. That was real medicine, not some grandmother's recipe from a man who probably didn't even graduate high school. The words hit their mark. Jonah's face flushed deeper, but he held his ground. You're right. I didn't go to college. I clean your floors and empty your trash. His voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. But I also held my wife's hand while she died from something doctors couldn't fix. I know what it's like to watch someone slip away while experts shake their heads. And I know what it's like to see a miracle when my daughter's skin healed after everyone said it was impossible.
This is emotional manipulation. Mariah turned fully toward the bed now. He's playing on your desperation. Ilyana, please, let me call security. This is dangerous. He could be mentally unstable. The jar could contain anything. Mariah, Ilyana's voice was quiet, but carried an edge of steel. Look at his eyes. What? Look at his eyes. Look at his hands. Mariah glanced at Jonah dismissively. I don't see. His hands are shaking, but not from fear, from hope, from the weight of what he's about to do. There was a pause. Then Ilyana continued. He knows he could lose his job for this. He knows we could have him arrested. But he came anyway. I've seen 1,000 doctors in the last 6 weeks, Mariah. Every one of them looked at me like a puzzle to solve, like a challenge to their ego, like a case study for a medical journal. Another pause. This man, he's looking at me like a person who's suffering. That doesn't mean his jar of goop will help. Mariah's voice cracked slightly. Tell me, Ilyana said to Jonah, why did you really come here tonight? Jonah met her swollen, barely visible eyes. Even from across the room, he could see the angry red welts covering her face, the scales that had replaced what was once beautiful skin. But he could also see something else, a desperate flickering hope. Because I couldn't sleep anymore, he said quietly, knowing I might have something that could help and doing nothing about it. Because every night when I clean this floor, I hear you crying when you think no one's listening. He swallowed hard. Because I know what it's like to feel helpless, ma'am, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
5 years ago, Jonah Graves had been a different man. He'd worked construction during the day, came home to his pregnant wife Emma at night, and dreamed about the family they were building. They'd picked out names, painted the nursery pale yellow, argued playfully about whether their daughter would have his eyes or hers. Then Emma went into labor, and everything changed. The complications started small, just some unusual bleeding. Then her blood pressure spiked. Then her organs began failing one by one. The doctors ran tests, administered treatments, brought in specialists. Nothing worked. It was as if her body had turned against itself in ways they couldn't understand. She'd held baby Sienna once, just once. Long enough to whisper, "Take care of our girl," before the machine started screaming. Jonah had buried his wife on a Tuesday, started his night shift janitorial job the following Monday. He needed the health insurance for Sienna, needed the steady paycheck, needed to keep moving, because if he stopped, the grief would swallow him whole. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking," Jonah said now, still standing in the doorway with Mariah glaring at him, "how long have you been sick?" Eliana's voice was hoarse. 6 weeks. It started as a rash on my arms, minor irritation. I thought it was stress, maybe an allergic reaction to new soap. A bitter laugh. Within days, it spread. Now 60% of my body is covered. The pain is indescribable, like my skin is on fire every second of every day. And the doctors? 500 consultations, specialists from Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, physicians from Switzerland, Japan, Australia. Her voice cracked. 43 different treatments. Each one either did nothing or made me worse. The steroids shut down my kidneys. The immunosuppressants triggered seizures. Simple antihistamines sent me into anaphylactic shock.
Mariah interjected, her voice defensive. We've tried everything. The best minds in the world have examined her. This isn't something a janitor with a jar of kitchen ingredients can fix. But Jonah had stopped listening to Mariah. He was remembering. Sienna had been 6 months old when the eczema started. tiny red patches on her cheeks that spread within days to cover her entire body. She'd screamed through the nights, her baby's skin raw and bleeding where she'd scratched it. The pediatrician prescribed steroid creams that did nothing. The dermatologist suggested elimination diets, special formulas, hypoallergenic everything. Nothing worked. Jonah had been at his breaking point, exhausted from Sienna's screaming, from sleepless nights, from watching his daughter suffer, when his elderly neighbor Maren had knocked on his door. Maren was in her 80s, a Polish immigrant who'd lived on their floor for 40 years. She'd heard Sienna crying through the walls. "My grandmother had a remedy," she'd said in her thick accent, pressing a yellowed index card into Jonah's hand. "For skin that medicine cannot help. You try, yes?" Desperate, Jonah had tried. The recipe was specific. Calendula extract from flowers grown in alkaline soil, colloidal oatmeal ground to exact fineness, raw honey from bees that fed on specific wildflowers, and lavender oil. But not just any lavender oil, it had to come from plants grown in mineral-rich soil with particular pH levels. Maren had been adamant about the preparation method too. The ingredients had to be combined at exact temperatures in a specific order. And it had to be prepared during a new moon, something Jonah had dismissed as superstition. But he'd followed every instruction anyway. Within 3 days, Sienna's skin had started healing. Within a week, it was completely clear. The pediatrician was baffled. The dermatologist had no explanation. Jonah had kept that index card in his wallet ever since, a reminder that sometimes answers came from unexpected places.
"This is insane!" Mariah's voice pulled Jonah back to the present. "Eliana, you're going to trust your life to a janitor's home remedy? What will the board say? What will the medical team say when they find out? What have they done for me?" "Mariah," there was steel in Eliana's weak voice now. "500 doctors, millions of dollars, and I'm still dying. My skin is on fire every second of every day. I haven't slept in 3 weeks. I'm 35 years old, and I'm planning my funeral." Silence filled the room. "Tell me about your daughter's condition," Eliana said to Jonah. So he did. He explained Sienna's eczema, the failed treatments, Maren's remedy, the specific ingredients, and why they mattered. He talked about how calendula had anti-inflammatory properties, how colloidal oatmeal was actually FDA approved for treating skin conditions, how raw honey provided antimicrobial effects. Mariah paced the room, periodically scoffing and rolling her eyes, but Eliana listened intently, her scientific mind engaging despite her pain. "The lavender oil," Eliana said slowly. "You mentioned specific soil conditions, mineral-rich with particular pH levels, that could theoretically affect the chemical composition of the essential oils produced by the plant. You're actually considering this?" Mariah was aghast. "What else do I have to consider?" Eliana's voice rose slightly. "Another team from Berlin will tell me they've never seen anything like this. More steroids that shut down my organs. More nights wondering if I'll wake up tomorrow. But he's nobody." Mariah gestured at Jonah's uniform, her face flushed with frustration. "And maybe," Eliana said slowly, each word deliberate, "that's exactly why he can see what everyone else missed. Sometimes the answer isn't in making things more complex. Sometimes it's in remembering simplicity."
Jonah placed the jar gently on the bedside table. His hands had stopped shaking. "I'll leave it here, ma'am. The instructions are taped to the side. If you decide not to use it, I understand completely. I had to try." He turned to leave. "Wait." Jonah stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "If I use this, will you come back tomorrow night to see if it worked?" Mariah made a sound of complete exasperation, but Jonah ignored her. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply. "I'll come back." After Jonah left, Mariah immediately launched into a tirade. "This is the most irresponsible thing you've ever done. A janitor, Eliana, a complete nobody with some jar of who knows what. The media will have a field day if they find out the CEO of a pharmaceutical company resorted to..." Mariah, Ileana's voice cut through the rant, in all your concerns about appearances and protocols and what people will think, did you notice something? What? He never asked for money, never mentioned a reward, didn't even ask me to try it. He just left it here and said he understands if I don't use it. Mariah fell silent, her mouth opening and closing without sound. 500 doctors, and not one of them looked at me the way that man just did. Like I was a person, not a medical mystery, not a challenge to their reputation. Just a person who's suffering. The room fell quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors. I'm going to try it. Ileana! Just a small amount, on one patch of skin. If it makes things worse, we'll know immediately. But if it helps, Mariah, if it helps even a little.
That night, despite Mariah's continued protests, Ileana carefully applied a small amount of the remedy to a patch of affected skin on her forearm. The texture was smooth, the scent gentle, lavender and honey. Within minutes, the incessant burning sensation began to ease. Not much, just enough to be noticeable. By morning, something remarkable had happened. The angry red welts in that small patch had calmed to pink. The scales had softened, and for the first time in 6 weeks, that section of skin didn't feel like it was being held over an open flame. Mariah stared at Ileana's arm in shock. It's probably coincidence. Spontaneous improvement. These things happen. But her voice lacked conviction. When Jonah returned the next night, pushing his cleaning cart down the executive wing, his stomach was in knots. Had the remedy worked? Had it made things worse? Would security be waiting to escort him out? He knocked softly on the door of Suite 12. This time, Mariah opened it without hostility. Her expression was complicated. Confusion, wonder, and something that might have been the beginnings of respect. "She wants to see you," Mariah said quietly, stepping aside. Jonah entered. Ileana was sitting up slightly in bed, and even from across the room, he could see the difference. The patch of skin where she'd applied the remedy looked dramatically better. "It worked," Ileana said, her voice stronger than the night before. "Mr. Graves, it actually worked." "Jonah," he said automatically. "Please, just call me Jonah." "Jonah." She smiled, the first real smile Mariah had seen in weeks. "I applied it to larger areas this morning. Same results. The pain is less. The burning has stopped in those spots. It's like my skin is remembering how to be skin again."
Over the next 3 days, the improvement was undeniable. The remedy that 500 doctors had failed to provide had come from a janitor's wallet, written on a yellowed index card by an elderly Polish woman who'd learned it from her grandmother. Mariah, forced to acknowledge what she was seeing, became an unlikely ally. She helped document the recovery, ensured consistent application of the remedy, and even researched the scientific basis for why it might be working. "I owe you an apology," Mariah said to Jonah on the 4th night. "I judged you, dismissed you, nearly had you arrested for trying to help." "You were protecting her," Jonah said simply. "I understand that." "No," Mariah shook her head. "I was protecting my assumptions, my belief that wisdom only comes from people with the right credentials, the right degrees, the right positions." She looked at him directly. "You taught me something important. Sometimes the answer isn't in the people we expect." As Ileana's condition improved, something else began to happen. During his nightly cleaning rounds, Jonah would stop by her room, just for a few minutes at first, to check on her progress, to adjust the remedy's application based on which areas needed more attention. But the conversations began to stretch. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 30. Soon Jonah was spending his break sitting in the chair beside Ileana's bed, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his life, about Emma's death and the medical mystery that had taken her, about 4-year-old Sienna who loved drawing and asked endless questions about how clouds stayed in the sky, about his mother who watched Sienna during his night shifts but was getting older, more tired, about the weight of being a single father, of working a job that exhausted his body so he could provide for his daughter.
He learned about her life, too, about building Ashford Biotech from nothing, about the pressure of being a woman CEO in a male-dominated industry, about the loneliness at the top where everyone wanted something from you, but few truly saw you, about her dreams of making medicine accessible, of funding research for diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignored because they weren't profitable enough. "I've been so focused on helping people on a grand scale," Ileana said one night, "that I forgot what it feels like to be helped as a person, not as a CEO or a case study, just as someone who's suffering." "Sometimes we get so lost in the big picture that we forget the small moments or what actually matter," Jonah replied. Mariah watched these midnight conversations from the doorway, saw her boss laugh for the first time in months, saw the isolated executive becoming someone softer, more open, and she saw Jonah, this man she'd dismissed as nobody, treat Ileana with a gentleness that had nothing to do with her money or position. One night, as Jonah was leaving, Mariah pulled him aside. "She's falling for you," Mariah said bluntly. "You know that, right?" Jonah's face flushed. "We're just talking." "Jonah," Mariah's voice was gentle now, "I've worked for Ileana for 8 years. I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you, and I've certainly never seen her laugh the way she does when you're here." "She's a CEO. I'm a janitor. Those worlds don't mix. They're just labels. And maybe it's time both of you stopped letting labels define what's possible." By December, Ileana's skin had healed enough for discharge. The doctors were baffled but couldn't argue with results. Her case would be studied for years, the mysterious condition that hundreds of specialists couldn't solve, cured by a simple remedy. The night before she was set to leave, Ileana asked Jonah to meet her in the hospital garden. It was cold, but she wanted fresh air, wanted to feel the wind on her skin without pain for the first time in months. Mariah came too, standing a respectful distance away as Jonah and Ileana sat on a bench surrounded by dormant flower beds. "You saved my life," Ileana said, her breath visible in the December air. "You saved your own life by being brave enough to trust someone you had every reason to dismiss." "I don't want this to end," Ileana said quietly. "These conversations, seeing you every night, I know it's complicated. I know our lives are completely different, but I'd like to see you again, outside these walls, if you'd want that." Ileana's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much."
Their first date was at a small coffee shop in downtown Boston. Ileana arrived. No designer clothes, no makeup to hide behind, just her. Jonah wore his nicest shirt, nervous in a way he hadn't been since high school. They were both awkward at first, stumbling over words, unsure how to act outside the familiar rhythm of hospital room conversations. But then Ileana laughed at one of Jonah's stories about Sienna trying to teach their elderly neighbor's cat to fetch, and the tension broke. They talked for 3 hours. The coffee shop staff started cleaning around them. Neither noticed. If you've ever felt like two different worlds could never connect, like the distance between who you are and who you want to be with is too great to cross, you know exactly what Jonah and Ileana were feeling in that moment. The hope mixed with fear, the possibility mixed with doubt. Their second date was at a bookstore. Ileana insisted, saying she wanted to buy picture books for Sienna. She spent 40 minutes carefully selecting stories about brave girls and curious minds, asking Jonah detailed questions about what his daughter would like. Watching her flip through children's books with such genuine care, Jonah felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the powerful CEO. This was just a woman who wanted to make a 4-year-old happy. "Would you—" He hesitated. "Would you want to meet her? Sienna, I mean. No pressure. It's just—" "Yes." Ileana's answer was immediate. "I'd love to." The following Saturday, Ileana arrived at Jonah's modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood 40 minutes from Boston's downtown. She held a stuffed bunny and a set of watercolor paints, gifts she'd agonized over for days, terrified of getting it wrong. Sienna peeked out from behind Jonah's leg, her eyes wide and curious. Ileana knelt down to her level, making herself smaller, less intimidating. "Hi, Sienna."
Your daddy told me you like to draw. I brought some paints. Want to show me what you can make?
For a long moment, Sienna just stared. Then, slowly, she emerged from behind Jonah's leg. "Can you paint clouds?" Sienna asked, in her small voice. "I'm not very good at it," Eliana admitted. "But maybe you could teach me?" That afternoon, Jonah watched from his tiny kitchen as Eliana and his daughter sat on the living room floor, surrounded by papers and paint. Eliana asked Sienna about each drawing with genuine interest, not the polite attention adults sometimes give children, but real curiosity. "This one is Daddy," Sienna explained, pointing to a stick figure with a big smile. "And this is me. And this," she hesitated, glancing at Eliana shyly, "this could be you, if you want." Eliana's eyes glistened. "I would love that." Over the following months, Eliana became woven into the fabric of their small family. She took Sienna to the aquarium, patiently explaining about each creature while Sienna pressed her face against the glass in wonder. They went to parks where Eliana pushed Sienna on swings, and Jonah watched them both, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt since Emma. Movie nights became a tradition. The three of them squeezed onto Jonah's old couch, sharing popcorn, Sienna eventually falling asleep between them. Eliana would carefully lift Sienna's head onto her lap, stroking her hair with a tenderness that made Jonah's throat tight. One evening, as Jonah tucked Sienna into bed, his daughter looked up at him with serious eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "is Ellie going to be my new mommy?" Jonah's breath caught. "Would you want that, sweetheart?" Sienna nodded vigorously. "She's nice, and she knows about clouds, and she doesn't leave even when I ask her a million questions." After Sienna fell asleep, Jonah found Eliana in the living room. He told her what Sienna had asked. Eliana was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I never thought I'd have this. A family. I was always too busy, too focused on the company. I told myself I didn't need it. But then I met you, and Sienna, and I realized I wasn't too busy. I was just waiting for the right people." Eliana invited them to her home the following weekend, a massive house in an exclusive Boston suburb. Sienna's eyes went wide as they drove through the gates. "You live in a castle," Sienna breathed. Eliana laughed. "It's too big for just me. Houses like this need families. They need laughter and messy art projects and people who actually live in them, not just sleep there between workdays." Jonah's mother came to visit one afternoon, the woman who'd been caring for Sienna during Jonah's night shifts, exhausted but loving. She watched Eliana interact with her granddaughter, saw how naturally they fit together. Later, as Eliana showed Sienna the garden, Jonah's mother pulled him aside. "She looks at you the way Emma did," his mother said quietly. "With real love, not the kind that's about what you can provide or who you are on paper, the kind that sees your soul." "It feels too good to be true," Jonah admitted, "like I'm going to wake up and realize it was just a dream." His mother touched his cheek gently. "Then stop waiting to wake up. Start living it." 6 months after their first date, Jonah and Eliana were married in the hospital garden where everything had begun, where Jonah had first held a small jar, and Eliana had first chosen to trust. It was a small ceremony. Close friends, hospital staff who'd witnessed the miracle, Jonah's mother in the front row dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and Sienna, dressed in white as the flower girl, clutching her stuffed bunny and beaming with joy. Mariah stood as maid of honor, still sometimes shaking her head in wonder at the journey that had brought them here. As Eliana walked down the makeshift aisle, her skin completely healed and glowing with happiness, Jonah felt tears prick his eyes. The janitor and the CEO, worlds that weren't supposed to touch, let alone merge. But they had, because sometimes love doesn't care about labels or expectations or what society says should be. The vows were simple but powerful. "You saw me when I was invisible," Eliana said, her voice steady. "You helped me when I had nothing to offer in return. You taught me that strength isn't about power or control. It's about being brave enough to care even when it might cost you everything." Jonah's voice was thick with emotion. You taught me that walls can come down, that different worlds can become one, that love doesn't see job titles or bank accounts, it just sees hearts. And your heart is the most beautiful thing I've ever known. Kiss her, Daddy, Sienna shouted, unable to contain herself, and the small gathering erupted in laughter. Jonah did, and as everyone applauded, Mariah stepped forward for her toast. 6 months ago, Mariah began, her voice carrying across the garden, I almost called security on this man. I saw a janitor, someone beneath us, someone who had no business being in that room, and certainly no business suggesting he could help where brilliant minds had failed. She paused, looking at Jonah with open warmth now. I was so wrong it makes me ashamed, but it also taught me the most important lesson of my life. Wisdom doesn't come in expected packages. Sometimes the most extraordinary solutions come from the most ordinary people who have the courage to care. She raised her glass. Jonah gave Eliana her life back, and Eliana gave Jonah and Sienna something beautiful too. A family completed. Here's to seeing past labels, here's to courage, here's to love that defies expectations. As the small reception continued, Eliana found a quiet moment with Jonah. Do you remember what you said that first night? She asked. In my hospital room? I said a lot of things. Most of them probably sounded crazy. You said you couldn't sleep anymore, knowing you might have something that could help and doing nothing about it. She took his hand. That courage changed my life, not just because of the remedy, but because you showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about having power. It's about using whatever you have to help someone else, even when the world tells you you're not enough. I'm still just a janitor, Jonah said softly. No, Eliana shook her head. You're the man who refused to let labels define what you could give. You're the father who works night shifts so his daughter has everything she needs. You're the person who saw suffering and couldn't walk away. She smiled. And now you're my husband. That's all the definition you need. Their life together became something neither had imagined possible. Eliana continued running Ashford Biotech, but differently now, more present, more grounded, remembering that the point of the work was always the people it served. She started funding research into rare conditions that big pharmaceutical companies ignored, remembering what it felt like to be the patient everyone gave up on. Jonah enrolled in evening classes, pursuing the education he'd never had the chance to complete. Eliana supported him, not with money, but with belief, studying with him at the kitchen table after Sienna went to bed, celebrating every test passed, every milestone reached. But he never forgot where he'd come from. Once a month, he volunteered at the hospital, working alongside the janitorial staff, reminding himself that dignity isn't defined by title.
If this story touched your heart, don't leave silently. Subscribe to Souls Connecting Tales and stay with us for more moments that remind us what it means to be human. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Your words might comfort someone who needs them more than you know. And if you felt even a spark of hope today, give this video a like, because sometimes a small act of support can change everything.